And almost here we go. We're live with Marni Hockenberg, patriot and good friend of the whole patriot community. And we're here discussing in another segment about the life and times of Philip Haney, the author of See Something, Say Nothing. And Marni had the pleasure of knowing Philip Haney and hosting him at various events in the cities where he was a guest speaker and motivated people. And I'm just going to take a back seat now and let Marni share her thoughts and feelings on the the life of Philip Haney and what he meant to people who knew him.
Thank you, Wes, for doing this. I think everybody who's a friend of Phil and his family appreciates this. And first of all, I want to say to Phil's family and his close friends that we grieve with you, and we are so very sad to lose Phil. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a sister or brother to such an amazing person like Phil Haney and lose him. So we just want you to know that our thoughts and prayers are with you at this time. So I had the great honor of meeting Phil a few years ago. I live in Minneapolis, and I know, Wes, you live in Minnesota here in Rochester, and so we're both in the what they call the upper house of Islam, and this is the state where the Marxist and Islamic counter-state has taken over. So Phil took a very particular interest in coming to Minnesota many times, and I had the absolute honor of meeting him at a book signing a few years ago. And at that time, I was just really impressed with his knowledge, his demeanor. He was so nice and very easy to talk with. And I learned so much by reading his book, and it was an incredible journey that he had been through. Little did I know that I would be blessed with knowing Phil and becoming a friend of his. And you all know, those of you who have met Phil, that once you are a friend of Phil Haney, you're a friend for life. And you're a good friend for life because Phil spent time with his friends, calling, texting, listening, talking, learning. He had an amazing ability to connect with everybody.
Yeah.
And you too, Wes, and you shared a lot of time with him here in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that first week after I heard that he'd passed away, so many memories came rushing back, and he was a special man. And even though he shared his professionalism with us and his, you still saw the personal side of his life. He was a really warm guy, and it's still always he was always examining and always collecting information. Those skills as an interrogator were were finely tuned skills, and he knew how to talk to people and learn from people, and he was really engaged when he was talking with you. But yeah, so those are some special times. The Trump rally here in Rochester stands out particularly, but I didn't want to take this over and have it be about me, but it's been some time. Some time has passed since he passed away, and the memories don't seem to fade. He inspired a lot of us, didn't he? He inspired.
He did, and that was part of Phil's, I think, blessing from God to us. Is that I feel like his physical body is gone, but his spirit lives on like nobody's I have ever met. I do feel every day Phil's presence, just his spirit and his soul. And oftentimes during the day, I would just say, what would Phil do? What would Phil think right now? And I what is going on? And he would spend time with everybody. And you can see behind me, I actually do have Phil in a sense here in my house. This is a poster. You can see there's a picture right here, Phil in the middle, and he spent a lot of time here. And here's off for the deplorables, and he attended, and that's him down here enjoying chili with us. And here's a picture of Phil with Laura Loomer and that was taken in the fall of 2018. I'll talk about that in a minute when he was here helping us, and Laura was here as well. We have Phil here at the Rochester Trump rally that you alluded to. And then we have a picture of Phil with Save the Persecuted Christians, which was, he was a very devout Christian and totally devoted to his religion. I am Jewish, and we had many conversations about Israel and Judaism. And at the top, Phil spent time at my friend Dave's house. Dave put this together, and he was a friend really to everybody. So I have this in my house, and every day I look at it and just say, Phil, you're here, and I've learned so much from him. And his wisdom is always going to be with me and the people that were fortunate to be in his life. I also have another photo I'm going to put up here. This is There's Phil with Laura Loomer, and you can see how happy he was.
Yeah.
That was taken at a local restaurant in November of 2018 after the elections. We had a thank you party for him and for Laura for doing so much work in Minneapolis. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So I have reminders of Phil literally all over the house, and his spirit is with me. And I am so inspired to keep his mission going. We all have to keep his mission going. Phil had a mission in life. He was a super patriot, and he understood, I think to his very essence, every cell in his being understood the value of our liberty and our freedom in America and our Constitution. And he lived for freedom and liberty in America. And even though he might be gone, his spirit is here, and people who are watching are filled with Phil's wisdom and spirit.
Do you remember how he used to say in nearly every lecture, he used to say, does your oath ever expire? To
Yes.
uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Does that ever expire, folks?
Yeah,
There'd
it was
be a
always
chill.
a great reminder. It's like a slap up the side of the head, like,
Yeah,
oh, yes,
that's
that's
right.
what we have to do.
Pledge allegiance is the similar same thing. Pledge allegiance to the flag.
Mhm.
And yeah, super patriot. Yeah.
Yeah, he understood. I just was amazed. And, I am here in Minneapolis. I am just a local grassroots citizen activist like you, Wes, we find ourselves in this bizarre world of the Marxist Islamic counter-state literal takeover of our state. And you and I and many other patriots in Minnesota woke up and saw what was happening, or maybe knew all along. I just woke up
Mhm.
about 10 years ago and started attending Act for America meetings and going to lectures and reading books and doing my own independent research. And what I found here was chilling, that we are literally here at the doorstep of this. The people out here are the enemy. We are living behind enemy lines.
Mhm.
But Phil was always really good about helping us understand the complexity of it, but he did it in such a way that it was easy to understand, but also very deep, obviously, because of his personal experience
Mhm.
being the DHS whistleblower. And he truly understood from his own personal experience how dangerous it is to speak out, but how essential it
Mhm.
is for people to stand up for our constitutional republic. And he would always remind me that that is what we are fighting for.
He showed us what happens to whistleblowers and people who speak out, what happens to people who pose questions or they're following through with their duties. And he came upon this tremendous knowledge, and he, had all of these massive amounts of data and files, and he's told to destroy it. And he showed us what happens to a whistleblower. It's sort of a metaphor for what's happened to the United States of America, what's happened to our republic is similar. They put the blinders on the people at the DHS. They put the blinders on Phil Haney and said, literally, see something but say nothing,
Say nothing.
right?
Yeah.
It brings it home, and all of America is in a similar situation where we see something, but you're afraid to speak out because of political correctness or because of the dominant. I think that's changing now, really, and I think as it's swinging, the pendulum swinging, the red green alliance is becoming more desperate. about, because they sense the public discourse is shifting and people have had enough.
Yeah,
Uh,
basically, it's like, hey, Jaylani Hussein at CARE, the jig is up. Okay,
mhm,
we know what the plan is,
mhm, mhm.
to take
That,
over in the name of Allah and impose Sharia, the explanatory memorandum.
I was just going to
Right
mention the
there.
explanatory memorandum because Philip Haney would always bring the original source material. He would bring the documents. He wouldn't say, "Hey, I'm telling you this. Believe me because I'm an authority." He'd
Hmm.
say, "This is in the criminal. This is in the justice record. This is in the documents." So
Hmm.
lots of footnotes, lots of endnotes, and again, I'm talking too much. I really let me turn it back on to you, Marni, to sort of keep my ego in check here. But yeah.
Well, we don't need to do that. We just all are both patriots and grassroots activists because we love our country, and we literally are having a front row seat to the takeover of America. So, and Phil knew that, and that's why he came. He came to Minneapolis or Minnesota and the surrounding areas for a number of months in 2018 on a quest to warn people about Keith Ellison and his Marxist Islamic agenda and take a tour with Trevor Loudon and other people through this area because it was such a critical election with Keith Ellison running for Attorney General, a Sharia compliant Muslim, Marxist, no border, cop hater, domestic abuser, Louis Farrakhan follower. I mean, could I go on and on about Keith Hakeem Ellison?
The
He,
he was promoting the Antifa book and wearing the T-shirt saying
yep,
"Yo no creo en frontieras," I don't believe in frontiers, and he
so
was
dangerous.
Laura Loomer
But of
helped
course,
that truck. Mm,
the
that-
mainstream media here is Marxist, and they absolutely cover for Keith, and they love him, and Ilhan Omar, and he was warning us about her as well, because this is an election that has had dire consequences, not just for Minnesota, but for America. Because now us in Michigan, we're at the tip of the spear with the invasion. And Phil, from firsthand, obviously, with his background in the DHS, truly understood the implications of what would happen to our freedoms and liberties if they were elected. And they were. So with Phil traveling around the state, he would keep us informed. He called us the Minutemen of Minnesota. And he would send out an email with meme of the day, what was happening, some information, and a schedule of his schedule. So I want to show you guys. This is a man who has an amazing amount of energy and passion. This was his schedule for 2 months, every single day. I'll just read you a few things. Minnesota Minutemen schedule. It went from September 5th to November 6th, Election Day. More on that in a minute. So to give you an idea, here are some of the things that where he went. Let's see. He arrived in Minneapolis to go to the Harbor Church in Spicer and guarantee. And then he went to Frida's Cafe in Wilmer. And then he went to St. Cloud Red Hat Forum and Gateway Eagle Council in St. Louis, Missouri. So he traveled from Minneapolis to Missouri
mhm.
in the Whale, I might add,
Yeah.
in his RV. I've been in the Whale.
Yeah.
It's an amazing experience. He sang a song to us in the parking lot in the Whale. That was Phil. He was such a Renaissance man. He would go, had a work day. He went to Kansas City, St. Cloud. He went to Christchurch. He camped out at the St. Cloud campgrounds. He was very particular about where he would stay in the Whale because obviously he didn't want to be tracked. He really had to be under the radar.
Right.
Making friends all along the way. He had a video interview session at Third Rail Studio. He had a lunch with Laura Loomer
Mhm.
and went to the Trump rally in Rochester. That was in October. I
Mhm.
actually, let's see. Okay, so I did the John Guandolo's Understanding the Threat, Train the Trainer program. And Phil was one of our speakers, and he would come in and talk to us about the Muslim Brotherhood. And he was so interesting and incredibly knowledgeable. I couldn't just, it was just enrapturing to listen to him.
Mhm.
When the program was over, Phil was still in town. So was Chris Gobbets and Laura Loomer. So I took them with some of my friends to Shaw's Bar and Grill, which is a local blues dive bar. And
Okay.
they had the best time. So we arrive and I introduced Phil to the band, and I didn't know that Phil was a musician. So we're chatting and socializing, and the guys are having a great time, band's playing. All of a sudden, look, and there's Phil Haney on stage singing Mustang Sally with the band. It was so fun. I'm like, oh my God, it's Phil Haney up there on stage. I have it on a video and I love watching it because Phil was a joyful person, in addition to being so very serious about the topics that he would teach us. And he just had a great time, great voice. And I came to understand that Phil was a songwriter, poet, artist. He was truly a Renaissance man. I've never met somebody like that. So going back to the schedule back in October, he would go to with the Rochester Front Rally where you were. And then he went to, let's see, oh, he went to a CARE open house in St. Paul. How
Oh.
interesting. I wonder how that went. That was right around, yeah, that was right around the time when I went to the Muslim American Society meeting at the convention center in Minneapolis. So, yeah, I know. I wanted to go and see Keith Ellison was going to be speaking in the afternoon. He and Ilhan Omar were going to be on a panel. And I just wanted to go down. They said it was open to the public. So I wanted to go down and sit and
Yeah,
see what they were going to say.
right. They're
Open to the
elected
public,
officials after all, right? Or they, but yeah, they were elected
they're
officials.
candidates.
Yeah,
Why would I
candidates
go?
at that point, they're, yeah, you should have the right to hear what the candidates are going to say.
At the
I think I know
convention
what's
center was,
coming.
which is a publicly funded, taxpayer funded entity. Alone, which I didn't have a problem with, but Debbie Anderson found out about it and she called Phil and said, hey, Marni's going down to the Muslim Brotherhood meeting. You might want to go with her or go be there. And of course, Phil wanted to go to hear Keith Ellison and Ilhan Omar. So he was in the other room and we were just texting back and forth. And I really think he was watching my back. I know he was there to make sure I was going to be okay. And
Yeah.
I did end up getting kicked out of
Uh-huh.
that meeting. Yeah. And I was sitting there minding my own business, and security guard comes up and, sorry, ma'am, you have to leave. We went back and forth. I refused to leave, demanded an answer. He left. He came back. I'm like, I'm not leaving unless you give me a good answer. And he finally revealed, you're on a list, and the organizers don't want you here.
Oh, you're
Mm-hmm.
on the list.
Sharia. Can anybody
Yeah.
Sharia? Right? So I came out and then I argued with him a little bit. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but I wasn't going to leave unless I really had to because I knew Phil was in the other room. Finally, I left and then Phil texted me, are you okay? And he stayed. Apparently, Keith Ellison and Ilhan Omar did not appear on the panel. They
Oh,
canceled that afternoon. Interesting, huh?
interesting. Yeah, so they suspected that they had been infiltrated. That, it's astonishing how quickly they will shut down their activities when they're confronted. Um,
Yes.
it's astonishing. They're not used to this sort of resistance, and
No.
only in America, right? Because I think Phil said something like, "Nothing motivates a patriot, nothing wakes a patriot up more than oppression." And so once we start to realize that our liberties are being threatened and we step it up, then
Mm-hmm.
guess what? There's been other cancellations, for instance, right? And we
Yeah.
know, yeah,
I
that
have to say, are you talking about the dismantling hate crime program in St. Cloud
right,
that I
right,
got shut down
yeah,
because Kira was sponsoring it and they were going to be having a program with the representative, an FBI agent? Well,
right.
if that's not supposed to happen, the FBI
Yeah,
disavowed working with CARE,
the
right? So I
protocols
got a
have
calling
changed.
campaign going, I got a protest going, and we shut that thing down because when confronted, the Marxists and the jihadis here right now anyway, when confronted, they will back down. The Marxists are real
Yeah.
cowards.
It seems too that I mean, I get this from some other folks who were tracking Keith Ellison's events. They've actually doggedly followed him around the
Yeah.
state to these hate hoax panels that he's leading, and they've gone in and successfully filmed these hate hoax, and he'll do it with CARE officials. You know, you have the state Minnesota State Attorney General sharing a stage with the Council on American Islamic Relations
Mm-hmm.
regional outreach coordinator. So there's like an elected official, a high elected official for the state of Minnesota on stage with a person with connections with the Muslim Brotherhood. How do you explain
Who's the
this?
head of a terrorist organization?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
through the looking glass and down the rabbit hole. We're really Minnesota is wow. And what Phil Haney was doing constantly was waking people up to how and why this is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and how and why the terrorist connections, need to be exposed. You track the ant back to its nest, and then you find the hive. You follow the money, or you follow the connections. So yeah, it looks as if these tours have been canceled in Minnesota because people showed up, not just one or two. I mean, there have been like something like 5 to 10 people tracking Keith Ellison's events and then sharing through, sharing the statements that he makes on stage. And it's astonishing. We're going to see some of that coming out at some point. I really believe that the people who are doing that are putting something together to show people the best bits.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you mentioned that because Phil was texting me prior to New Year's, and he said that he was very excited to ring in the new year and a new era. Phil said this would be a new era. Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is
Mm-hmm.
right now. I believe he knew what was going to be happening with this Chinese virus and the stripping away of our liberties and what we're seeing unfold right now. He was very prophetic in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, these are strange days, and it's funny how we're forced to go online with these things. I mean, some other people would want to, meet secretly or privately, but it's just exhausting trying to rent venues just to have them shut down by the opposition. Well, I mean, you know how that is. They make a couple phone calls and they,
Yeah.
shame or scare the
And
church
the
or
cowards here back down, which is why we're in such a dire straits here.
yeah.
And Phil knew that. We talked about it a lot. And he was the one that really opened my eyes to the fact, and according to Phil, and I think he's right, that the reason Keith Ellison won Minnesota was because of the Republicans. They did not go out and vote because the Republican Party, what's the nice word that I could use, were derelict in their duties to promote Doug Wardlow and
Mhm.
tell the truth about Keith Ellison and did not motivate the voters in Minnesota to go out and vote for Doug Wardlow. And had they done their job, Keith Ellison would not have won.
I can
In
tell you there were zero events for, wait, there were one or two events for Doug Wardlow in Rochester, but they were closed and they were just sort of the insiders
the
had,
inner circle,
so the inner
the Reno
circle
circle.
would drive him around. But having brought, as I did, I brought all of the candidates through, for even the ones I disagreed with, except for one who was for the legalization of marijuana. I didn't bring him to Rochester. It wouldn't have gone over well, and I also don't personally believe that people should use a drug that causes them to lose their country and not care about it at the same time. So, but this whole thing is that, yeah, the Republicans didn't welcome candidates who weren't insider people that they had handpicked, and also, but they didn't go after Keith Ellison on really
No,
obvious things like
they
Amy
could have.
Alexander and
It's
Karen
just so
Monahan.
easy.
They wouldn't discuss Amy Alexander, Karen. They just, all they had to do was show up, and you guys successfully. I mean, that park event was pretty fun too. That was a nice picnic, and Laura.
We
That's
brought Laura
great.
Loomer in to Loomer Keith Ellison and to raise awareness about his domestic violence violation. She was amazing. She was like a I don't know. I've never met anybody like Laura Loomer. Let me just put it that way. And Laura and Phil were close, and Phil was really a good mentor to Laura. I think he looked at her as a daughter, and she is the next generation. She's the hope. She and her generation are the hope for America, which is
Really.
why we do what we do, so that they will have a bright future. And Phil truly understood that. So we had a lot of conversations about what was happening and still was happening in Minnesota with people involved and this and that. And he really opened my eyes to a lot of the nuances and personalities and agendas on
Mhm.
what is going on behind the scenes. Because Phil had a real sixth sense about people. He would sense things about me that I didn't really know. And we would talk about it. And I'm like, oh my God, Phil, how did you know this about me? Well, he goes, I could tell. I could
That's
tell.
the interrogator in him. And he's an observer of life and people and human beings. And a lot of the things he did were ways of opening doors, whether it's playing guitar or being on stage and singing Mustang Sally or having a beer. He knew how to move into people's lives and engage with them where they were at.
Where they were at.
Yeah.
That was the key. It wasn't about Phil.
Hmm.
There's some people that it's like, oh, it's all about me, listen to me, me, be the center of attention.
Hmm.
Phil, he would tell me, he had an analogy. I loved his analogies. I mean, my gosh, how many did he have on his stories, And he would say he was like air in a jar. He would just pour into a jar, and he would fill it up, but it would be invisible, but he would take on the form of the jar.
Hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but it did to
It
me at the
does. Yeah.
time. He could blend in anywhere with his um, flannel shirt and his
Yeah.
knit cap
Cap.
or whatever, and very unassuming. And I think that was the beauty of Phil. And he was avid nature lover. He would text me pictures of sunsets and flowers and birds and poems that he'd written and everything. He was just a sharer, and he wanted the best for everybody with a true heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to
Maybe.
believe that he's gone. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just hard to. I know it, and I've gone through a lot of grieving with this, and I think about him every day. Obviously, he's watching over me, and he's my guardian angel. He
Yeah.
really, truly is. And I'll ask him about this or ask him about that, but it's just hard to really fathom that he's gone, that
Yeah.
we won't be able to call him and
Mm.
take advantage of his wisdom anymore. It's just unreal. And I hope they complete the investigation and we find something out. I mean, you hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
Yeah.
After all, it is California and everything and all, but I won't
Right.
comment more on that. We'll just wait to
Yeah.
see how things played out. But I don't believe he committed suicide, and I don't think that anybody that really knew Phil would believe the reports that came out from the sheriff's department. They had to trot that thing out. And they had to trot that thing out for whatever reason, also because then it would disappear in the news, which it did tragically.
Mhm.
And Phil is an American hero, and he needs to be honored as such. And he needs to be taught to all of our children, our school kids, our
Mhm.
children and grandchildren, what a great hero he was. And he gave his life, literally, for
Mhm.
our freedom and liberty, so that you and I could talk on Skype and put something up on YouTube until they take us down, the big tech, right? For our freedom, as long as we can, and carry on his legacy and always speak the truth and not be afraid to do that. And it's just, I have a hard time, really digesting it, but it is true. And it's been giving me inspiration to keep on and keep on with the mission and keep on going, because you and I know, Wes, how hard it is in Minnesota. We're
Mhm.
literally pushing the boulder uphill
Mhm.
here. And thank God we have a group of energized patriots in
Mhm.
our state who truly understand what's going on and are willing to stand up and shout it out. Unfortunately, we can't rely obviously on the GOP. They were the ones that bent over
Mhm.
and literally let the takeover happen, because a lot of them knew about Islam and Sharia, and they were warned and they were educated, but yet they were too afraid of conflict and they were too afraid of their reputations and not getting reelected or whatever reason.
Mhm.
And then they
Oh,
rolled over
so
and then they still fund it.
deep habit of getting along to go along in Minnesota,
Yes.
going along to get along.
Oh my
It's a village
God.
mentality of keeping the wise butt, like just
Oh, the Minnesota nice.
who you think you're so smart, you're too smart for your own good, kid. And yeah, so you're supposed to accept all of these changes. And Philip Haney was really bent on training his replacements. It's kind of like every time he spoke somewhere, he was hoping that somebody would pick up the torch and carry it because he was tired sometimes. He was physically tired and mentally tired. And think of the mantle of knowledge that he carried around with himself, that he had all of that data and information, and he couldn't talk freely about, half the things he knew.
Oh,
He
what
couldn't speak out. And if we were polite, we wouldn't have asked him, right? And I mean, I know I would sit with him and I wouldn't ask him like what's this, just
How
because
do you do
there's
it?
things he
How do you
couldn't
do it,
say.
Phil? How do you
Yeah,
get through each day knowing what you know and
yeah,
having gone through what you've gone? But he was a rock, a
yeah,
solid rock.
yeah.
I never saw him get rattled. I really never did. He probably was not the
No,
kind of person. He just like took it in stride.
very
He
patient.
and
Yeah,
he had a good sense of humor about it too. He would have something wise to say, or a long story, or an analogy, or cute cartoon, or something. He just, I think, had an ability. God gave him an ability to handle this burden. And then obviously tracking the killers, the San Bernardino killers,
yeah.
and the Orlando Pulse nightclub, the jihadis. I
Right.
think we would call them what they are, the jihadis.
Yeah.
And then he had tracked them. And if Obama hadn't conducted his big purge and deleted all the files, American lives could have been saved. People could be living today. People could be celebrating births and weddings and happy celebrations. But
All of those things he did, and now that he's gone, it almost has served to light a fire. Sort of, if you have a
I
little
hope
plate
so.
of water and you slap the plate of water, all you end up doing is splashing that water all over the table. And so I think that in a sense, everyone's taking heart and moving on. And
I
I
hope
mean,
so.
speaking up and speaking out. I don't know,
Sure.
but we're in lockdown. I guess this is day 5 of the lockdown in Minnesota since Friday. So we're all kind of dealing with that, aren't we? It's
Yeah.
be a week. The day after tomorrow will be 1 week of the lockdown. But I don't think anybody's. I think we're in an incubation period, and a lot of people will be, um, ready to come out once we're allowed to go outside again. But
Oh, and if our neighbors don't rat us out on the snitch line, you hear about that?
I was out raking leaves today because I didn't rake them in the fall. I guess I'm doubly reprehensible. I didn't clean them up in the fall and I waited until spring. So, um,
Did you know there's a hotline to call to snitch
yeah,
on people who are violating the stay-at-home ordinance?
right, right.
Yes, there is an actual number to call. That is the high, and the number is what? 1-800 Gestapo. The communists took it over. They are literally training us to snitch on our neighbors. And that harkens back, though, Wes, and I just miss Phil so much. I wanted to call him about this. There's so many things like, Phil, okay, they're doing this. What's next? Or how do you handle it? Remember the challenging Islamophobia conferences last year when Keith Ellison was ramping it up with Jaylani Hussein,
Yeah.
and they were naming, they were going to be developing these hate crime centers in
Hmm.
Bemidji, Worthington, and Bemidji under the
Right.
Human Rights Commission. You know that as well as I
Yeah.
do,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So you could call in and report all the crimes hate crimes against Muslims. All 5 of them in the whole state every year.
Anti-Semitism, right? Anti-Semitism,
Oh,
co-opted
and the
term.
anti-Semitism. Oh my God. Yeah,
Sure.
Phil and
We
I
should
would.
have. I did a program in Rochester with a Holocaust survivor that it was covered in the news and then it vanished off their archives. But that's not anti-Semitism, right? Just make history disappear,
Yep.
right?
No, they don't care. The Muslims are using the Jews. You and I both know that. I am Jewish. I see that plain as day. Plain as day. The liberal Jews are being played like a fiddle with all of these interfaith dialogues and Keith Hakeem Ellison and Jaylani, Mr. Rogers sweater wearing Hussein.
Funny, the only people who have a problem with diversity are the people who, took over the Arabian Peninsula and murdered all the Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians and all of the other folks who didn't see things their way. I mean, there were Hindus in the Arabian Peninsula prior to the rise of Islam. There were a plethora of cultures and languages. There was a multicultural environment. There were the Romans were there, the Greeks were there. It was cosmopolitan. That should be a multiculturalistic person's concept of paradise. Where are all those people today? They're all gone. All those languages, all those villages, everyone's gone. So just a monolithic one system remains. But I didn't mean to go so far astray.
Down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, down the rabbit hole.
Jihad.
But yeah, down the jihad, But it's funny.
You have to have a sense of humor about this. When people who are watching that don't live in Minnesota, you don't get us. You don't live here behind enemy lines.
Right.
We have to stay sane, and we have to have some kind of a sense of humor about this. Otherwise, you would just go literally crazy.
Right.
Right.
They are talking about interviewing government employees and measuring their levels of implicit bias.
Yep.
So the plans are afoot to take people aside by human resource coordinators who've been carefully trained of interviewing people to find out their implicit bias, right? Let me shut off this phone. Sorry.
Right. To interview something that doesn't exist. How about that? To interview a unicorn. Phil and I had a lot of discussions about that as well. And I had the opportunity to be interviewed on some talk shows like Will Johnson or Steel Truth, and I could always rely on Phil to help me prepare for that, because he was a wealth of knowledge and to be able to sound like I knew what I was talking about. And so we had a lot of discussions and laughs about that, because Phil had a great sense of humor.
And it really, diversity really is our strength, because within this movement of people working in different fields and different gardens, I like to think that you, Marni, you're growing tomatoes, and maybe Michelle's string beans, and then at the end I've got a surplus, and you know what, we share it around. So you have insights, other people have insights, everybody's doing something that they do. So that shows that on our side, at least, diversity is our strength. We're in an insurgency. We're the ones who need to hide under the bridges and behind the trees, doing what we're doing and sharing in new and creative ways, because we can't be monolithic about this. And when Haney would go around Minnesota and then down to Missouri and then over to Wisconsin and South Dakota, North Dakota, when he would just keep rolling that shark, the whale, right? Or the shark. The whale. It just keeps moving forward and igniting little brush fires everywhere he went, and inspiring people to bring out the variety of the talents, the tools that they have in their tool chest.
Yeah.
Right?
He would meet you where you were, which was because pretty much everybody in the counter jihad movement here in Minnesota are just normal, everyday citizens who love America and care about the next generation and want to do something. Mm-hmm. Really, we're not rocket scientists or PhDs or, we have a variety of backgrounds, but what we have in common is that we're willing to fight for liberty. And Phil recognized that and appreciated. So everybody he met was a friend for life. He called us the little fish. And I wanted to make sure to bring that up. I have some notes here. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't forget anything. Right. So, okay. So he called us. We were the Minutemen, we were the Minutemen overall. But he would say that We are the little fish, and we're afraid of the big fish. There's a big fish in town, so maybe people are more prominent, maybe more financially, uh, uh, have earned more financially, or what have you, the big fish. But us little fish, we're a little scared of the big fish, but we could adeptly swim through the seaweed and see things that the big fish and go places that the big fish couldn't go. But when we got together as little fish and we formed a big school of fish,
Hmm. Hmm.
we could go after a larger entity, a big, or like a shark, for example, and scare that away. So that was a great analogy, that the little fish and the big fish, because that was Phil. He would always have has an analogy. So we actually have a group here where the little fish, you and I are little fish, and we
Hmm.
have to keep swimming together because I truly believe that that is what Phil would want, and he is looking down on us. He's
Hmm.
here with us to guide us and make sure that we win this battle for liberty for the sake of our children and grandchildren. We're not doing it for our generation. We're doing it for the next generation. And Phil really inspired us, of course, with many other people in the counter jihad movement. But Phil is the one that I feel, was probably the most impactful in my life for various reasons, and he'll always be there because he was bigger than life. Phil was bigger than life, and we miss him, Wes. We do. We just I talk to people all the time, and they say, "Marni, what's going on with the investigation?" And we miss Phil.
Hmm.
What do you hear? Luckily, well, let me say luckily, after I found out had been shot, that was a Friday, that a friend of mine called me to let me know that he had been shot and killed, and I couldn't believe it. I think I went into hysterics. I just had to hang up the phone and just, I had imploded. Oh God, that was just tough. And then the next day, I had some people over to my house, about 10 people that knew Phil, to come over to pray together,
Hmm.
mourn him, talk about him, and we needed to be together. And then I decided just to put together a real impromptu tribute to
Hmm.
Phil with some of the people that he had touched, whose lives he had touched here at Chris Bonvino's company in the warehouse. And we had a lot of people that came on the spur of the moment. It was 4 days, literally
Hmm.
4 days, to ramp that up because I felt very strongly that we need to get going and just do something because I'm wired that way. And
Yes, action.
it was action, and
Yeah.
plus I was leaving town for a couple of weeks. This happened on a Thursday night. I was leaving on Friday. So I'm glad I did because then we were hit with this, you know, pandemic and crisis, and everything shut down. So we couldn't even get together anyway. So I'm really glad that you're doing this, Wes, and talking to various people that were friends of Phil and impacted
It's
by his
a
life.
way that I'm processing my grief too is by saying, it's time to kind of step up and step out a little bit. You know, just go ahead and, why put on little events that are going to be for 30 or 50 or maybe 120 people? Why do that over and over again, hoping for a bigger crowd when it's so much more convenient to switch over to technology and um,
Yeah.
and hopefully everybody will start doing this more and more. I don't see any reason why we couldn't start having people all over the state or region participating in online conferences using
Like
technology. We have
Zoom
the
or
capability.
whatever.
We can
Yeah.
do Zoom. Yeah, we can get a Zoom subscription or set it up with a Skype subscription. We could have up to 100 people participating, and much less danger involved, except you're online, but much less of a chance of somebody infiltrating. And we've had a lot of wrong people signing up for tickets
We
for the.
have
They've been coming out of the woodwork.
Wetzel. This is
So
just state as a wackadoodle.
yeah, there's a
Oh boy.
university professor, a University of Minnesota professor from Minneapolis who's taking out 10 tickets or 15 tickets. It's like, why do you need 15 tickets? Who are you? You're not you're not going to be bringing your whole class, are you? Well, maybe. I don't know. Well, but yeah, this was all spur of the moment too, because needs must, and
Yeah.
it just it reluctantly went ahead and did it. You know. So the guy was an inspiration to everybody who met him
Yeah,
in their own way, and it'll be a tribute to him if we carry on and do something and keep
we will.
doing what we do. Do you
We will, and
yeah,
everybody out
oh,
there will too. That's That's
yeah,
my promise to Phil every day, right there. I
yeah.
see him. I say, Phil, I will do what I can today to preserve America, to preserve our liberties. Whatever it is, small, big, this is for you. And
Mark,
he looks
one
at
of
me and
the
goes, you go, girl.
tell about your story. I mean, in terms of being inspired, tell about what you did with the Pledge of Allegiance up there
Oh,
at the St. Louis Park City Council.
St. Louis Park.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, for those of you who don't know, the St. Louis Park City Council is in Ilhan Omar's district, and the council members are total Marxists, and they're, doing their inclusion and diversity programming and Agenda 2030 implementation, and, it's crazy town there. So I found out in the paper that they were going to be removing the saying of the Pledge of Allegiance. I couldn't believe the Red Star Tribune actually published that because that's a Marxist mouthpiece. But maybe they were proud of it, obviously, or maybe Ilhan
bragging.
Omar had them to, oh yeah, we're going to remove the pledge. So I'm like, what? I don't think so. Uh, uh, uh.
Well, Marty's on the
Oh no, you
watch.
don't. So I'm like, okay, we are getting a protest going. So I call Michelle. I said, Michelle, we are shutting this down. And if you know Michelle, even she's like, yeah, girl, we are doing this. So, because that's how we roll. So we ramped up. First of all, I did a video on that because I have a YouTube channel. Check me out, Marni Hockenberg, where I report on stuff like this. So we had people call in to the St. Louis Park City Council offices, the City Hall, literally overwhelmed their phone system to the point where they had to shut it down. They weren't getting any work done because so many people around the world were calling about this. Save the pledge. And then we had a protest in front of the City Hall offices with people. It was awesome. We had American people with American flags. Were you there, Wes? You were
I
there,
wasn't,
right?
I wasn't there that day. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I watched the
okay.
whole thing streaming online.
Oh,
I, I,
yeah.
I couldn't
It,
believe it. It was beautiful.
it
People
was
were
so
singing
People were
patriotic
singing
songs.
this American songs. We had a color guard, flags. It was a July day. It was beautiful. We had about 100 people out there. And then the news vans were there because they heard about it, obviously. And lo and behold, Elon Omar had visited their city council 2 weeks. What a coincidence, right?
Wait, can
Gosh,
you
what a
back
coincidence.
because the thing glitched just where you said like lo and
Oh,
behold, Omar. Can you
Oh,
pick it up from there?
Elon Omar had paid a visit to the St. Louis Park City Council 2 weeks prior. We found that online. So he was there. And I looked at the video because they always have to videotape the city council meetings. Right at the very end of the meeting, like an hour and a half meeting, right before the very end, the guy goes, okay, we're going to have our start time of the meetings at 7 o'clock. It's more convenient for people. Everybody say aye. Everybody's like, aye. Oh, and he's like, oh, and by the way, we're going to be removing the saying of the pledge during every meeting to make it a more welcoming environment for our diverse community. All of those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, it all passes. We conclude our meeting. That's how it went down. So I'm like, oh no, we aren't having any of that. So this was so fun. We didn't know what to expect, who was going to show up. It was incredible. So we're out there, then we storm into the city council chambers. And for any of you activists out there, people who are riled up about what is happening to our personal liberties, this is all you have to do. Just get down there, get out of your house, get off the couch after we're sheltering in place, if they let us. Maybe that was back in the day. Another thing. So we stormed into the city council chambers, we filled it up, and then we stood up. When they came in, we stood up and said the Pledge of Allegiance, and the city council members stayed seated, of course. Okay, so
Nice.
they were like, oh, I can't believe you all did this and blah blah blah, and this is just a working session, and we'll discuss it amongst ourselves, and our next meeting, and blah blah blah. We're like, yeah, right. So we got out and like, okay, we're doing a second rally. Well, in the meantime, Michelle even got interviewed on Fox News about the Save the Pledge,
Yeah.
and we created a website, savethepledge.com. We had people sign online petitions that we printed out, 30,000 of them, and we printed them out, put them in boxes, and we brought them to the second meeting. We got people riled up, and President Trump tweeted about it
That's
twice.
right.
Twice.
That's
The great
right.
people of Minnesota are standing up for their liberties. And I should frame it. I should have it right here.
Yeah.
Twice. So it's national news. Okay. So obviously, we went down there that second time and we had 250 people down there. There weren't enough. They had to close the doors. The people were in the lobby. They were downstairs. They were in the TV room. They filled the entire city council. They were pounding on the doors while during the meeting it was a rainy big thunderstorm and the glass was all fogged up and people were pounding like, save the pledge, and they're singing God Bless America and saying the pledge. It was crazy. It was like 4th of July exploded right in their city council offices. And people were so riled up. It was great. Then the city council members come in and we stand up and say the pledge again. They don't, whatever. They sit down. The first thing the mayor goes is, well, we have taken a vote and we have decided to reinstate the Pledge of Allegiance. Whoa! He's like, whoa! And then they go around the room and the council members are like, well, we don't really want to, but you're making us, and it's making really life hard for our
Oh,
staff. We
ooh,
apologize on their
ooh.
behalf, and well,
You
but it
know,
was great because we won. We
what-
won over the Marxists and the jihadis, and that is what it's all about. And that was what Phil. I called him after that and like told him about it. He's like, "Oh my God, this is great." He would want us to continue doing that because those kinds of things really do work.
and when you think about men of Phil Haney's character who took the oath to uphold and defend the
Old
Constitution, and then there's
Constitution.
some chickens living in Stackham and Packham uh, housing who don't want to have to be bothered with saying the
Yep.
Pledge of Allegiance. If you're not going to defend the country you live in, why don't you go live in the country you want to defend? And if
Why
you,
don't you just go back to
yeah,
Somalia
or just well,
or the
well,
Soviet
or
or the Russia, Soviet, go to
or
Russia? You love
or
communism so
Venezuela.
much? Go.
When you see Ilhan Omar on stage with Bernie Sanders in Minneapolis and people are cheering her on, then you know that the Red Green Alliance is real. And it's not something that
Oh,
we're making up in some attic or a basement somewhere.
yeah,
It's
with her
it's that
tinfoil hat.
right.
Oh, she's a tin.
Right. Oh, you're a
No, no, no.
conspiracy theorist. Yeah.
It's as real as a heart attack.
Yes,
Real as a heart
absolutely.
attack. And we see it all the time. Every day you will step out here if they don't turn you into the Gestapo these days. But we see it play out.
When
You see it in Rochester every day. I see it in Minneapolis every single day. I am constantly reminded
Yeah.
by the
They are little
takeover.
teasers too. The Marxists are little teasers. They'll come up with some little thing like, gee, why do you believe that? Well, or they'll tweak something because they'll try to play your feelings. They've had a really
Yes.
long run of using our Judeo-Christian ethics to fold American culture back on itself in
Mm-hmm.
terms of saying, oh, there's room at the inn. Welcome the stranger, love thy neighbor. It's some kind of commandment. But the second part of that, love thy neighbor as thyself. And my expectation for myself is that I don't stab
Stab them.
people. Yeah, jinx. I don't,
I don't,
I
I don't
don't
cut
blow
their
up.
head
I
off.
tend, I
That's
tend
pretty
not to
good,
hurt other people. So, gentle Jesus, meek and mild. I mean, you've got Esther from the Old Testament. I asked Laura Loomer who her favorite female character was from the Bible, and she actually smiled, and her face lit up. She said Esther, and I was like, yeah, makes sense. You're a warrior. So, and Philip Haney had just taken a trip to Israel last year too. Did he ever discuss Israel? And I see you've got
love
the flag
Israel.
there. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
he loved it. And we had many, many discussions about Israel. In fact, Phil was signed up, and I was as well, to go on the United West tour trip to Israel in May, but obviously that got canceled. But I would have been so excited to go on a trip to Israel with Phil Haney. That
Yeah.
would be, I used to be a tour guide in Israel. I lived in Israel
Yeah.
for a number of years back in the day.
Yeah.
And, so, but to go see it through his eyes
Yeah.
would have been amazing.
Tremendous, tremendous. And I don't know. Are there any other things in your notes that you want to get in before we close out? Because we're
I don't,
coming up
let me
to,
just, let me just
yeah.
take a peek. And I don't think so. I think I pretty much covered everything. Hold on. There's so many things. Oh, I did want to talk about his wife, Francesca.
Okay.
And she came to Minnesota a couple times. And for those of you who know, she was literally dying of cancer while he was in Minnesota, and she knew that this mission was so important for him that he came out, and he missed out on quite a bit of time with her, and he was so devoted to her. He called her all the time, loved her so very much, and he was um, literally devastated when she passed. And so I did want to just a nod to her, and she was amazing. I didn't really have a chance to get to know her very well, but to be married to Phil Haney would have been an incredible journey through life, and she was an incredible woman, and they had an amazing life together. So I did want to make sure to bring that up, and we welcomed her as we welcomed Phil. So she was at the election night results party. Uh-huh. Yeah, and when the results came in that Keith had won and Ilhan Omar, and I can't even imagine what Phil would have been feeling at that time because he put in so much effort to try to thwart that. But he was still there with us and rallying the troops. So I think that's all I have, Wes. And we've talked for a while, and I really appreciate you bringing me on to talk about Phil. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marnie. And
Yeah.
let's just keep it going and adopt, adapt, and improve. We're in lockdown, but it doesn't mean it stops us from speaking out and sharing. And you know, we just have to maybe show Phil's book one more time, see
Yes.
something, say nothing. It's a metaphor for our times, folks. It's a cautionary tale. And so you may not find it at the bookstore, but ask any of your patriot friends if someone's flying a flag in front of their house. They might have a copy of this inside because Phil met a lot of people in Minnesota and he fired up a lot of people to take action. And well, Marnie, thank you so much. Marnie, you froze up. Oh, there you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
you froze too.
Well, thank you,
Oh,
Marnie.
hello,
Like the
FBI.
screen just. Oh. When you watch this later, you'll see
Or
there were
Leilani
moments.
Hussein. I don't know.
Uh,
Whoever's surveying
hopefully they'll
us.
learn something.
It's a
Hopefully they'll.
Minnesota sense of humor. You gotta laugh about it. But
I just keep hoping those young guys and the interns are listening. They're the ones they assign to watch stuff like this because we'll be able to red pill people inside the deep state.
mm-hmm.
Let's hope they learn some.
And Mohammed.
Yep, I'll call you. Thanks, Marnie. Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Jess.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.